The telegram arrived at the worst possible moment, just as Eleanor Winters was elbow-deep in bread dough, and it announced that her aunt had died and left her a boarding house in San Angelo, Texas, a place Eleanor had never even heard of until that gray April morning in 1876. She stood in the cramped Philadelphia kitchen where she had worked for the past 3 years, flour dusting her apron and arms, staring at the thin paper with its cryptic message. Her employer, Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose pinched face seemed permanently arranged in an expression of disapproval, snatched the telegram from her hands and read it aloud with a sniff of disdain. "Texas," Mrs. Henderson said, as though the word itself were distasteful. "Wild country. You would be foolish to go." But Eleanor, at 22 years old, had spent her entire life being careful, being quiet, being exactly what everyone expected her to be. Her parents had died when she was 15, leaving her with nothing but a strong work ethic and the ability to keep her head down. She had worked in 3 different households since then, saving every penny she could, dreaming of something more but never quite believing it would come. "I think I will go," Eleanor heard herself say, surprising even herself. Mrs. Henderson's face reddened. "If you leave this house, you will not be welcomed back." Eleanor untied her apron slowly, her hands steadier than she expected. "I understand." 3 weeks later, she stepped off the train in San Angelo, Texas, carrying a single worn carpetbag and wearing her best dress, which had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. The heat hit her like a physical thing, so different from the damp springs of Philadelphia. The sun blazed overhead in a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at, and dust swirled in small tornadoes down the wide dirt streets. The boarding house was not hard to find. It sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure that had once been painted white, but now showed more wood than paint. The porch sagged on one side, several shutters hung at odd angles, and the front steps looked like they might collapse under any real weight. Eleanor stood in front of it for a long moment, her optimism wavering. Then she squared her shoulders, climbed the questionable steps carefully, and pushed open the front door. The inside was worse than the outside. Dust covered every surface in a thick blanket. Cobwebs draped the corners like macabre decorations, and the furniture looked like it had been gnawed on by something large and determined. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, and there was a suspicious stain on the ceiling that suggested the roof leaked badly. But it was hers. Eleanor set down her carpetbag and rolled up her sleeves. Then she began to hum, a habit she had developed as a child, a way to fill the silence and keep her spirits up during difficult work. The melody was something her mother had sung, wordless and sweet, and it echoed through the empty rooms as Eleanor opened windows, swept floors, and assessed the monumental task ahead of her. She spent the first week simply making the place livable. She scrubbed and swept, patched holes in the walls with old newspapers and paste, and managed to convince a local carpenter to fix the worst of the structural problems in exchange for future room and board. The man, an older fellow with kind eyes named Mr. Peterson, shook his head often as he worked. "Your aunt let this place go something awful in her last years," he said. "Shame, really. Used to be the finest boarding house in San Angelo." "It will be again," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. Mr. Peterson smiled. "I believe you might just manage it, miss. You have got a determination about you." By the second week, Eleanor had the downstairs presentable enough to open for business. She posted notices around town advertising clean rooms and hot meals at reasonable rates. The first few guests were cowboys passing through, rough men who tracked in mud and spoke little, but they paid on time and did not cause trouble. Eleanor established a routine. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and doing laundry, her afternoons cooking and mending, and her evenings keeping the accounts and planning for the next day. And through it all, she hummed. It was not a conscious choice. The humming simply happened, rising up from some deep place inside her whenever her hands were busy. Sometimes it was cheerful, sometimes melancholy, but it was always there, a constant melody threading through the boarding house. The guests did not comment on it at first. They ate their meals, paid their bills, and went about their business. But after 3 weeks, things began to change. Eleanor was serving breakfast one morning, moving between the table and the kitchen with plates of eggs and biscuits, humming softly as she worked. 4 men sat at the long dining table, 3 cowboys and a merchant from San Antonio. She had just set down a fresh pot of coffee when one of the cowboys, a surly fellow named Jack, slammed his hand on the table. "Can you stop that infernal noise?" he demanded. Eleanor froze, the coffee pot still in her hand. "Excuse me." "That humming," Jack said, his face twisted in irritation. "You do it constantly. It is driving me mad." Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks. She had not realized she had been humming loud enough for others to hear. "I apologize. I did not mean to disturb you." "Well, you are disturbing me," Jack continued. "A man cannot even eat his breakfast in peace without that endless droning." One of the other cowboys nodded. "He has got a point. You hum when you are cooking, when you are cleaning, when you are just standing there." "It is a bit much." The merchant cleared his throat. "I must agree. While I mean no offense, Miss Winters, it can be rather distracting." Eleanor felt something inside her shrink. She thought of Mrs. Henderson in Philadelphia, of all the times she had been told she was too much or not enough, too loud or too quiet, too something. She had thought here, in her own place, she could simply be herself. "I will try to be more mindful," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The rest of breakfast passed in uncomfortable silence. Eleanor stopped humming, but the quiet felt oppressive, weighing down on her like a physical burden. She moved through her tasks mechanically, her jaw clenched tight to keep any sound from escaping. By the afternoon, she felt hollow. The boarding house, which had begun to feel like a home, now felt like just another place where she had to make herself smaller to fit in. She was scrubbing the front porch, working in grim silence, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Eleanor looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. The man on the horse was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He was massive, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His buckskin shirt stretched across a chest thick with muscle, and his arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up, were corded with strength. He had long dark hair that fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a beard that was neatly trimmed despite his rugged appearance. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with deep lines around his eyes and a strong jaw. He looked like he had been carved from the mountains themselves. He dismounted with easy grace despite his size and stood looking at the boarding house for a long moment. His eyes, Eleanor noticed, were a striking pale blue, startling against his tanned skin. "You Eleanor Winters?" he asked. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I am," Eleanor said, standing up from her scrubbing. Even standing, she barely reached his shoulder. "Can I help you?" "Name is Ryder Flynn," he said. "I heard you might have a room available, long term." Eleanor hesitated. She had been hoping for steady boarders, people who would stay weeks or months rather than days. But this man, with his intimidating size and wild appearance, was not what she had expected. "I do have rooms available," she said carefully. "The rate is $4 a week, meals included." Ryder pulled out a worn leather pouch and counted out bills without hesitation. "I will take a room for a month to start. I am staying in the area for a while, doing some trapping in the hills north of town." Eleanor had heard of mountain men, the trappers and hunters who lived in the wilderness and came to civilization only when necessary. She had never expected to have one as a boarder. "Very well," she said, taking the money. "I will show you to a room." Ryder followed her inside, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. Eleanor led him upstairs to the best of the available rooms, one that faced east and caught the morning light. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a chair. "Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening," Eleanor said. "I ask that boarders keep their rooms tidy and respect the other guests." Ryder set down the pack he had been carrying and looked around the room. "This will do fine, Miss Winters. I appreciate you having me." There was something in his tone, a genuine warmth that surprised Eleanor. She nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The other boarders," she said slowly. "They prefer quiet during meals. I ask that you respect that as well." Something flickered in Ryder's eyes, but he simply nodded. "Of course." That evening, Eleanor prepared supper in silence. It felt strange, working without her usual accompaniment, but she kept her mouth firmly closed. She could hear the low murmur of conversation from the dining room as the boarders gathered, and she steeled herself before carrying out the first dishes. Ryder sat at the far end of the table, his large frame making the chair look small. He nodded politely to the other men, but did not join their conversation. Eleanor served the meal, chicken and vegetables with fresh bread, and retreated to the kitchen as quickly as possible. She was washing dishes, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered, when she realized she had started humming again. The melody had slipped out without her conscious thought, soft and low. Eleanor stopped immediately, pressing her lips together and glancing nervously toward the dining room. But no one called out, no one complained. Perhaps they had not heard her. The next morning, Eleanor woke determined to maintain her silence. She prepared breakfast without a sound, moving through the familiar tasks with grim efficiency. But something was missing. The work felt harder without her music, more tedious and joyless. Ryder was the first one down for breakfast. He settled at the table with a quiet thank you as Eleanor poured his coffee. The other men trickled in over the next few minutes, and soon the table was full. Eleanor was just returning to the kitchen when she heard Jack's voice. "Finally," he said with satisfaction. "Peace and quiet." I knew she could manage it if she tried. Eleanor's hands tightened on the tray she carried. She stood in the kitchen, breathing slowly, telling herself it did not matter. But it did matter. It mattered very much. She served the rest of the meal in silence, then began cleaning up. She was scrubbing a pot when she became aware of someone standing in the kitchen doorway. She turned to find Ryder watching her, his expression thoughtful. "Need something, Mr. Flynn?" she asked. "Call me Ryder," he said. "And I just wanted to say that was a fine breakfast. Best I have had in months." "Thank you," Eleanor said, turning back to her pot. "Can I ask you something?" Ryder said. Eleanor paused. "Of course." "Why did you stop?" "Stop what?" "Humming," Ryder said simply. "You were humming yesterday when I arrived. Today, nothing but silence." Eleanor set down the pot carefully. "The other boarders found it bothersome. I am trying to be more considerate." Ryder was quiet for a moment. "That is a shame." Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised. "A shame?" "I liked it," Ryder said. His pale blue eyes met hers steadily. "Made the place feel welcoming, made it feel like a home instead of just a building." Something loosened in Eleanor's chest, a knot she had not realized had been there. "That is kind of you to say." "Not kind," Ryder said. "True." He nodded to her and left the kitchen, his heavy footsteps retreating up the stairs. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen, her hands still damp from dishwater, and felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. One kind word should not affect her so much. But it had been so long since anyone had told her that something about her, something natural and unconsidered, was good. The next few days passed in the same uncomfortable silence. Eleanor bit back her humming, catching herself dozens of times as the melody tried to escape. The work felt endless without it, and she found herself exhausted by evening, worn down not just by the physical labor but by the constant self-monitoring. Ryder came and went at irregular hours, presumably tending his trap lines in the hills. But Eleanor noticed he always made it back for at least one meal a day, usually supper. He spoke little, but he was unfailingly polite, and he always thanked Eleanor for the food. On the fourth day after Ryder's arrival, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the boarding house. It was hot work, and sweat dampened her hairline and the back of her neck. She moved mechanically, pinning sheets and shirts to the line, her mind elsewhere. She did not realize she had started humming until she heard a voice behind her. "There it is," Ryder said. Eleanor gasped and dropped the shirt she had been holding. She spun around to find Ryder standing a few feet away, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I am sorry," Eleanor said quickly. "I did not realize I was making noise." "Do not apologize," Ryder said. "I told you I like it." Eleanor bent to retrieve the fallen shirt, shaking out the dust. "The others do not." "The others are fools," Ryder said bluntly. Eleanor looked up at him in surprise. Ryder met her gaze steadily, and she was struck again by how blue his eyes were, like chips of mountain ice. "I should not speak ill of your other boarders," Ryder continued. "But I have been listening this week and I have noticed something. When you hum, this house feels alive. When you are silent, it is just a building where people eat and sleep. There is a difference." "Mr. Flynn," Eleanor started. "Ryder," he corrected. "Ryder," Eleanor amended. "I appreciate your kindness, but the fact remains that the majority of my boarders find my humming bothersome. I cannot afford to lose their business." "Can you afford to lose yourself?" Ryder asked quietly. The question caught Eleanor off guard. She stood with the damp shirt in her hands, staring at this massive, gruff man who somehow saw something in her that she had forgotten to see herself. "I am not losing myself," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Ryder stepped closer. He was so large that Eleanor had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, but despite his size, there was nothing threatening about him. In fact, Eleanor felt safer standing near him than she had in a long time. "My mother used to sing while she cooked," Ryder said. "Old songs from her childhood in Tennessee. My father always said it was his favorite sound in the world. He said it meant home and family and everything good." He paused, a distant look in his eyes. "They are both gone now, have been for years. But sometimes I hear a woman singing, and for just a moment, I am back in that small cabin with the fire burning and my mother's voice filling the air. It is a gift, Eleanor. What you do is a gift." Eleanor felt tears burning again, but this time she did not blink them back. One escaped, running down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "I did not mean to make you cry," Ryder said, alarm crossing his face. "No," Eleanor said, her voice thick. "No, you did not. Nobody has ever said anything like that to me before." Ryder reached out slowly, giving Eleanor plenty of time to step back if she wanted to. When she did not move, he gently brushed away another tear with his thumb. His hand was rough and calloused, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "Then people have been fools your whole life," he said simply. They stood like that for a moment, Eleanor looking up at Ryder, Ryder's hand still near her face. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should let you get back to work," he said, Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Ryder turned and walked back toward the house, but at the door he paused. "Eleanor," he said, not turning around, "do not stop humming, please. That humming makes this house a home." He went inside before Eleanor could respond. She stood in the yard, the forgotten laundry hanging limp in her hands, her heart beating fast in her chest. That evening at supper, Eleanor made a decision. She prepared the meal with her usual care: roasted pork with potatoes and greens and fresh apple pie for dessert. When everything was ready, she took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began to hum as she carried the dishes to the table. The response was immediate. Jack looked up sharply, his face darkening. The merchant sighed audibly. Even the other cowboys exchanged glances, but Eleanor did not stop. She set down the dishes, refilled coffee cups, and continued humming, soft but audible. Her heart pounded and her hands shook slightly, but she kept going. Finally, Jack threw down his napkin. "I thought we had settled this," he said angrily. "The humming stops." Eleanor straightened, meeting his gaze. "No, Mr. Jack. I agreed to try to be more mindful. I have tried, and I find that the humming is simply part of who I am. If it bothers you so much, you are welcome to find lodging elsewhere." Jack's face went red. "You cannot be serious." "I am perfectly serious," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is my boarding house, and I will run it as I see fit." "Now see here," the merchant began, but he was interrupted by a loud scraping sound. Ryder had pushed back his chair and stood. His full height and breadth were impressive, and suddenly the dining room seemed very small. He did not say anything, just stood there, his pale blue eyes moving from face to face. The effect was remarkable. Jack closed his mouth abruptly. The merchant looked down at his plate. The other cowboys suddenly became very interested in their food. "As Miss Winters said," Ryder finally spoke, his deep voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "if you do not like the accommodations here, you are free to leave. Personally, I have never been more comfortable anywhere. The food is excellent, the rooms are clean, and the atmosphere is welcoming. If a little humming bothers you so much, perhaps the problem is not with Miss Winters." Jack stared at Ryder for a long moment. Ryder simply stared back, relaxed but immovable. Finally, Jack looked away. "Fine," Jack muttered, "but I will be leaving in the morning." "I will have your bill ready," Eleanor said. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence, but Eleanor noticed something. Despite the awkwardness, she felt lighter than she had in days. She had stood up for herself, claimed her space, and refused to make herself smaller. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After the meal, as the boarders dispersed, Ryder lingered. He helped Eleanor clear the table without being asked, carrying dishes to the kitchen with surprising delicacy given his large hands. "You did not have to do that," Eleanor said as they worked. "Stand up for me, I mean." Ryder shrugged. "I did not do it just for you. I meant what I said. I like it here." "Still," Eleanor said, "thank you." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Eleanor washing and Ryder drying. It was oddly domestic, and Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Ryder's presence beside her, the heat radiating from his large frame, the careful way he handled the dishes. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said. "Of course. Why do you live in the mountains? Why not settle in town?" Ryder was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with deliberate care. "I like the quiet," he finally said. "The simplicity. In the mountains, things make sense. You work hard, you survive. You are lazy, you do not. There is no pretense, no games, just life in its most basic form." "That sounds lonely," Eleanor said softly. "It can be," Ryder admitted. "But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone." Eleanor understood that sentiment more than she wanted to admit. Why stay in San Angelo then? Why not head deeper into the wilderness? Ryder set down the dish he had been drying and turned to face Eleanor. I am starting to find reasons to appreciate civilization again. The way he looked at her as he said it made Eleanor's breath catch. She forced herself to look away, to focus on the soapy water and the dishes still waiting to be washed. I am glad, she managed to say. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a comfortable silence this time, full of things unspoken but understood. When they were done, Ryder bid Eleanor good night and headed upstairs, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her racing thoughts. True to his word, Jack left the next morning, his departure marked by much grumbling and door slamming. The merchant left 2 days later, though he at least was civil about it. That left Eleanor with just 3 boarders, Ryder and the 2 cowboys, who seemed to have decided that their opinions on humming were not strong enough to warrant finding new lodgings. With fewer boarders, Eleanor had more time on her hands. She used it to improve the boarding house, making small repairs and touching up paint and planting a small garden in the yard. And through it all, she hummed. Ryder was gone most days, tending his traps, but he always returned for supper. Eleanor found herself looking forward to those evenings, to the quiet conversation they would share as she cooked, and he sometimes helped. He told her stories of his life in the mountains, of tracking animals and reading weather signs, of long winters spent in a small cabin with nothing but his own thoughts for company. In turn, Eleanor told him about her life in Philadelphia, about the endless series of households where she had worked, about her parents, and the quiet, respectable life they had led before the fever took them. She told him things she had never told anyone, and Ryder listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time in her life. One evening, about 3 weeks after Ryder had arrived, Eleanor was making bread. Her hands worked the dough with practiced ease, kneading and folding, while she hummed a melody her mother had taught her. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear Ryder come into the kitchen. "That is a beautiful song," he said. Eleanor gasped and whirled around, her flour-dusted hands flying to her chest. "You startled me." "I apologize," Ryder said, but he was smiling. "I did not mean to sneak up on you." Eleanor took a breath, her heart still racing. "It is fine. I was just lost in thought." Ryder moved closer, leaning against the counter beside where Eleanor worked. "What is that song? I do not think I have heard it before." "My mother used to sing it," Eleanor said, turning back to her dough. "I do not even know if it has a name." She said her mother sang it to her and her mother before that. "It is just something that has been passed down." "It is lovely," Ryder said. "Haunting, almost." Eleanor continued kneading, but she was acutely aware of Ryder watching her. "My mother had the most beautiful voice," she said. "Nothing like mine. She could have been a professional singer if circumstances had been different, but instead she married my father, who was a clerk, and they had a quiet life." "Was she happy?" Ryder asked. Eleanor considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "I think she was." She never complained, never seemed to regret her choices. She sang while she worked, just like I do. My father used to say it was his favorite thing about her. "Smart man," Ryder said. Eleanor glanced at him. There was something in his expression, a softness that made her stomach flutter. She looked away quickly, focusing on the dough. "Eleanor," Ryder said quietly. "Yes. I am glad you did not let those fools silence you." Eleanor's hands stilled. She stood there, her fingers buried in dough, feeling the weight of Ryder's words and the emotion behind them. "I am glad too," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, full of potential and promise. Then Eleanor cleared her throat and resumed her kneading, and Ryder straightened from the counter. "I will let you get back to work," he said, but he did not leave immediately. He stood there for another moment. as if he wanted to say something more. Finally, he nodded and left the kitchen, and Eleanor was alone with her bread dough and her racing heart. Summer settled over San Angelo with its characteristic heat and dust. Eleanor's boarding house gained new guests, travelers and workers drawn by the promise of clean rooms and good food. Word had spread that the young woman who ran the place was a fine cook and kept an orderly house, and that was enough recommendation for most people. Eleanor hired a local girl, a shy 16-year-old named Mary, to help with the increased workload. Mary was quiet and hardworking, and she did not seem to mind Eleanor's humming in the slightest. In fact, Eleanor sometimes caught the girl humming along as they worked side by side. Ryder remained a constant presence. He had extended his stay twice now, paying for another month each time without hesitation. Eleanor had long since stopped thinking of him as just a boarder. He was something else, something more, though she hesitated to examine exactly what that meant. One particularly hot afternoon in July, Eleanor was in the kitchen making preserves from the berries Mary had brought from her family's farm. The windows were open, but there was no breeze, and sweat trickled down Eleanor's back as she stirred the bubbling pot. She was humming almost unconsciously when Mary spoke up. "Miss Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Eleanor said, not taking her eyes off the preserves. "Is Mr. Flynn courting you?" Eleanor nearly dropped her spoon. "What?" Mary's cheeks went pink. "I am sorry, I should not have asked. It is just that everyone in town is talking about it. The way he looks at you, the way he is always here. People say he has never stayed in one place this long." Eleanor felt her own face heating, and not from the stove. "He is just a boarder, Mary." "A friend, perhaps, but nothing more." Mary looked skeptical but did not push the issue. Eleanor was grateful because she did not know how to explain something she did not fully understand herself. Yes, Ryder looked at her in a way that made her feel warm and nervous. Yes, she found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing in the mountains, looking forward to his return. But that did not mean anything. Did it? That evening, as if summoned by her thoughts, Ryder arrived back at the boarding house earlier than usual. He found Eleanor in the small parlor, mending a torn curtain. She looked up at his entrance, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "You are back early," she observed. "Finished checking my lines quickly today," Ryder said. He crossed the room and settled into the chair opposite Eleanor, his large frame making the furniture look delicate. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you about something." Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat. "Oh," Ryder leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "I have been here for almost 2 months now." "I know," Eleanor said, her needle still frozen in the air. "That is the longest I have stayed in one place in nearly 5 years," Ryder continued, "since my parents died and I took to the mountains." Eleanor set down her mending, giving Ryder her full attention. "What are you saying?" Ryder ran a hand through his long hair, a gesture Eleanor had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I am saying that I have been trying to convince myself to leave, to head back into the wilderness where I belong, but I cannot make myself do it." "Why not?" Eleanor asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Hoped she knew. "Because of you," Ryder said simply. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Because every time I am in those mountains, all I can think about is getting back here, to this house, to your cooking and your humming and your smile, to you." Eleanor could not breathe. She stared at Ryder, at this massive, gentle man who had somehow become the center of her world without her quite realizing it. "Ryder," she whispered. "I know I am not what you probably imagined," Ryder continued, the words coming faster now. "I am rough and I live more like an animal than a man most of the time. I do not have much to offer beyond some money from my furs and a willingness to work hard. But Eleanor, I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the first day I heard you humming on that porch." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so profound it almost hurt. "You are exactly what I imagined," she said, her voice breaking. "You are everything I did not know I needed. You see me, Ryder. You see who I really am, and you do not ask me to be smaller or quieter or different. You just let me be myself." Ryder stood and crossed to where Eleanor sat. He knelt in front of her, bringing his face level with hers despite his size. "Does that mean—" "I love you too," Eleanor said, and saying the words out loud felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I did not realize it until just now, but I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks." Ryder's face broke into a smile, wide and genuine, and Eleanor realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his weathered features, making him look younger and lighter. "Can I kiss you?" Ryder asked. Eleanor nodded, and Ryder cupped her face gently in his large, calloused hands. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor felt it all the way to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Eleanor Winters," Ryder said, his forehead resting against hers. "Will you let me court you properly? Let me prove that I can be the man you deserve." "You already are that man," Eleanor said. "But yes, I will let you court me." They sat together in the parlor for a long time, talking and planning and occasionally stealing more kisses. Eleanor learned that Ryder owned a cabin in the hills, a solid structure he had built himself, with a spring nearby and good hunting. He told her about his dreams of maybe raising some livestock, of building a real life instead of just surviving. In turn, Eleanor told him her dreams for the boarding house, how she wanted to expand it, maybe add more rooms, establish it as the premier lodging in San Angelo. She told him about the fears that still sometimes kept her awake at night, worries that she was not strong enough or smart enough to make this work. "You are the strongest person I know," Ryder said. "You came to a strange place with nothing and built something from it. You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to just give in. That takes real strength, Eleanor. Do not ever doubt yourself." The next weeks were a whirlwind. Ryder divided his time between his trap lines and the boarding house, but he was always back by evening. He helped Eleanor with repairs around the property, his strength and skill making quick work of tasks that would have taken her days. He fixed the sagging porch, replaced broken shutters, and patched the roof so well that Eleanor was confident it would hold through the next rain. But more than that, he courted her in small, thoughtful ways. He brought her wildflowers from the mountains, bright splashes of color that she arranged in mason jars around the house. He carved her a beautiful wooden spoon, perfectly balanced and smooth, which became her favorite for cooking. He taught her to read the weather and identify animal tracks, skills she never thought she would need but found fascinating. And Eleanor, in turn, showed Ryder what it meant to have a home again. She cooked his favorite meals, mended his clothes, and made sure his room was always welcoming when he returned from the mountains. She listened to his stories and shared her own, and slowly they built a life together even before they had formalized anything. The other boarders noticed, of course. The two cowboys, who had stayed on through the summer, teased Ryder good-naturedly about being domesticated. New guests sometimes raised eyebrows at the obvious affection between the landlady and the mountain man. But Eleanor found she did not care what anyone thought. For the first time in her life, she was truly happy, and no amount of gossip or judgment could diminish that. One evening in late August, Ryder did not return at his usual time. Eleanor tried not to worry, telling herself that he probably just got delayed on the trail. But as the sun set and full darkness fell, her anxiety grew. She paced the kitchen, unable to focus on any task, jumping at every sound. It was past 10 o'clock when she finally heard heavy footsteps on the porch. Eleanor rushed to the door and threw it open to find Ryder standing there, but something was wrong. He was favoring his left leg, and even in the dim light she could see blood on his shirt. "Oh my God," Eleanor breathed. "What happened?" "I am fine," Ryder said, but he swayed slightly as he stepped inside. Eleanor grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You are clearly not fine. Come on, we need to get you cleaned up." She helped him into the kitchen and made him sit in a chair. Under the bright lamplight, the damage was more apparent. He had a deep gash on his left arm and his leg was torn up pretty badly. "Bear?" Eleanor asked as she fetched water and clean cloths. "Mountain lion," Ryder corrected. "I got too close to her den. She was just protecting her cubs." "My own fault for not being more careful." Eleanor's hands shook as she began cleaning the wounds, but she forced herself to focus. She had helped tend injuries before, during her time in various households. The cuts were not as deep as she had initially feared, though they would definitely scar. "You need to see a doctor," Eleanor said. "I will be fine," Ryder insisted. "I have had worse." "Ryder Flynn, if you think I am going to let you risk infection just because you are too stubborn to see a doctor, you are mistaken," Eleanor said firmly. "Mary's father is a doctor. I am going to wake her and have her fetch him." Ryder opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again at the look on Eleanor's face. "Yes, madam," he said meekly. Eleanor woke Mary and sent her running for her father. While they waited, she continued cleaning Ryder's wounds as gently as possible. He sat stoically, barely flinching even when she had to probe at the deeper cuts. "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "I know this hurts." "I have had worse," Ryder repeated, but his voice was strained. "That does not make this better," Eleanor said. She looked up from her work, meeting his eyes. "You scared me, Ryder. When you did not come back, I thought." "I know," Ryder said. He reached out with his good arm and took her hand. "I am sorry I got careless." "Promise me you will be more careful," Eleanor said. "I cannot lose you, not now." "I promise," Ryder said. He squeezed her hand gently. "I have too much to live for now to take foolish risks." Dr. Williams arrived shortly after, a kindly older man with gentle hands and a reassuring manner. He examined Ryder's wounds, cleaned them more thoroughly than Eleanor had been able to, and stitched the worst of them closed. Through it all, Ryder remained stoic, though Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw and the white-knuckled grip he had on the chair arm. "You are lucky, Doctor," Williams said as he finished bandaging Ryder's arm. "A few inches to the left and that cat would have hit an artery. You would have bled out before you made it back to town." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Ryder said. "I have been fighting off predators most of my life." "Perhaps, Doctor," Williams allowed. "But even the most experienced can make fatal mistakes. You should rest for at least a week. Let these wounds start to heal before you go tramping back into those mountains." Ryder looked like he wanted to argue, but Eleanor spoke up first. "He will rest. I will make sure of it." Dr. Williams smiled. "I believe you will, Miss Winters." He packed up his supplies and stood. "I will check on him in a few days. Send Mary if there are any signs of fever or if the wounds start looking infected." After the doctor left, Eleanor helped Ryder upstairs to his room. He leaned on her heavily, though he tried to hide it, and by the time they reached his bed he was pale and sweating. "Let me help you with your shirt," Eleanor said. Ryder nodded, too exhausted to argue. Eleanor carefully helped him remove the torn, bloody garment, trying not to stare at the expanse of his chest and shoulders. She had known he was muscular, but seeing him without a shirt made her stomach flutter in a way that felt inappropriate given the circumstances. She helped him lie down and pulled a light blanket over him. "Do you need anything? Water? Something for the pain?" "I am fine," Ryder said, but his eyes were already closing. Eleanor stood by the bed watching him. In sleep he looked younger, less weathered. She resisted the urge to brush his long hair back from his forehead and instead turned to leave. "Eleanor," Ryder's voice stopped her at the door. "Yes, thank you, for taking care of me." "Always," Eleanor said simply. Over the next few days, Eleanor fussed over Ryder like a mother hen. She brought him meals in his room, changed his bandages, and refused to let him do anything more strenuous than walking downstairs for dinner. Ryder bore it with surprising patience, though she could tell he was restless. On the third day, she found him on the front porch, leaning against the railing and looking out at the street. She brought him a glass of water and stood beside him. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better," Ryder said. "The arm barely hurts anymore and the leg is healing well." "Good," Eleanor said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Eleanor said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About the future," Eleanor said. "About what happens when you are healed and you go back to your trap lines. About us." Ryder turned to look at her. "What about us?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I do not want you to go back to the mountains. Or rather, I do not want you to go back alone. I know that is selfish of me, but the thought of you up there by yourself, risking your life every day, it terrifies me." "Eleanor," Ryder said gently. "I know that is your life," Eleanor continued quickly. "I know that is what you do, and I would never ask you to change for me. But maybe we could find a compromise. Maybe you could trap less, spend more time here, or I could." "Marry me," Ryder interrupted. Eleanor stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Ryder turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Marry me, Eleanor. I have been trying to figure out the right way to ask, the right time, but there is never going to be a perfect moment. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you run this boarding house and build something together. Marry me." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Ryder pulled her into his arms, mindful of his injured arm, and kissed her deeply. Eleanor melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Ryder rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face. "I do not have a ring," he said. "I should have gotten a ring." "I do not need a ring," Eleanor said. "I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in San Angelo. Eleanor wore a new dress, pale blue with white lace, that she had splurged on at the general store. Ryder wore his best clothes, his long hair neatly combed and his beard freshly trimmed. He looked nervous and uncomfortable in his formal attire, but when Eleanor walked down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her heart swell. Mary was there, crying happy tears. Dr. Williams and his wife attended, along with several of Eleanor's regular customers, and a surprising number of townspeople who had come to respect the young woman who ran the boarding house. Even the 2 cowboy boarders showed up, grinning and elbowing each other. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ryder kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, ready to start their new life. Eleanor had closed the boarding house for the day, and they held a small celebration there. She and Mary had prepared food the day before, and there was laughter and music and dancing in the dining room that usually saw only quiet meals. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself standing in the kitchen, looking around at the house that had become her home. Ryder came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Eleanor said honestly. "Good," Ryder said. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." That night, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Ryder carried Eleanor up to what was now their shared room. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little," Eleanor admitted, "but mostly I am just happy." Ryder kissed her softly. "We will go slow. We have all the time in the world." The next morning, Eleanor woke wrapped in Ryder's arms, his large frame curled protectively around hers. Sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear birds singing outside. For a moment she just lay there, savoring the warmth and contentment, hardly believing this was her life now. Ryder stirred, his arms tightening around her. "Good morning, Mrs. Flynn," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Mrs. Flynn." Eleanor smiled. "Good morning, husband." They lay together for a while longer, but eventually the demands of the day called them up. Eleanor had to prepare breakfast for the remaining boarders, and Ryder wanted to check his trap lines, though he promised to be back by noon. As Eleanor worked in the kitchen, preparing eggs and bacon, she began to hum. The melody rose naturally, filling the house with its familiar comfort. Ryder paused on his way out the door, listening. "That is my favorite sound," he said. Eleanor looked up from the stove. "What is?" "That humming," Ryder said. "It means I am home." He left with a wave, and Eleanor continued her work, her heart light. She had found her place in the world, not despite her quirks and habits, but because of them. She had found a man who loved every part of her, who saw her completely and chose her anyway. The boarding house thrived under their joint management. Ryder used his skills to make repairs and improvements, adding a new room and building a proper barn for a horse and a milk cow they purchased. Eleanor's cooking and hospitality drew a steady stream of guests, and the house's reputation grew throughout San Angelo and beyond. But more than the material success, they built a life together. Ryder reduced his time on the trap lines, instead helping around the boarding house and taking on occasional work as a guide for wealthy Easterners who wanted to experience the wilderness. Eleanor expanded her offerings, hosting dinners for special occasions and even starting a small bakery business on the side. And through it all, Eleanor hummed. She hummed while she cooked and cleaned, while she tended the garden and fed the chickens Ryder had built a coop for. The sound filled the boarding house, and it became something guests commented on favorably, a charming quirk that made the place feel welcoming and warm. One evening in late spring, nearly a year after their wedding, Eleanor and Ryder sat on the front porch watching the sunset. Eleanor was sewing, fixing a torn shirt and humming softly. Ryder was working on a piece of leather, making a new bridle for their horse. "Ryder," Eleanor said, setting down her sewing. "Yes, I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made Ryder look up immediately. "What is it?" "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Eleanor said quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I am pregnant." Ryder's hands went still. He stared at Eleanor, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, wide and delighted. "Pregnant," he repeated. Eleanor nodded, her own smile matching his. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday. The baby should come in November." Ryder set aside his leather work and pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at the same time. Ryder placed a hand on her still flat stomach, his expression awed. "A baby, our baby." Over the following months, they prepared for the arrival of their child. Ryder built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling every time she thought about the little person who would wear them. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from morning sickness well into her 4th month, and the Texas heat made her last few months uncomfortable. But Ryder was attentive and caring, taking over many of her usual tasks and refusing to let her overwork herself. In mid-November, on a cool evening with the first hint of winter in the air, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting well into the next day. Ryder paced the downstairs like a caged animal, jumping every time he heard a sound from the bedroom where Dr. Williams and his wife were attending Eleanor. Finally, just as the sun was setting on the 2nd day, the thin wail of a newborn baby echoed through the house. Ryder froze, his heart pounding. Mrs. Williams appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Flynn." A healthy, strong son. Ryder bounded up the stairs, not waiting for permission. He pushed into the bedroom to find Eleanor propped up against pillows, exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Ryder," she said softly, "come meet your son." Ryder approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket, at the small fists waving, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Ryder whispered. "Would you like to hold him?" Eleanor asked. Ryder nodded, and Eleanor carefully transferred the baby into his large arms. The child looked impossibly small against Ryder's broad chest, fragile and precious. Ryder cradled him carefully, marveling at the tiny features, the shock of dark hair. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. "Thomas," Ryder said immediately, "after my father, Thomas Flynn." "Thomas Flynn," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas." The baby made a small sound, and both parents laughed, tears streaming down their faces. The first months with a new baby were exhausting but wonderful. Thomas was a good baby, though he had his fussy moments like all infants. Eleanor recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to running the boarding house, though with significantly more help from Ryder and Mary. Ryder proved to be a natural father. Despite his size and rough appearance, he was gentle and patient with Thomas. He would carry the baby for hours when he was fussy, walking the floors and singing soft songs in his deep, rumbling voice. Watching her husband with their son made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. When Thomas was 6 months old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Ryder laughed with delight and spun her around carefully, already planning how to expand their living quarters to accommodate a growing family. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in early 1879, an easier birth than Thomas had been. She had Eleanor's coloring, with light hair and hazel eyes, and a determined set to her tiny jaw that promised she would be stubborn like her mother. Life settled into a rhythm. The boarding house continued to thrive, and Ryder had largely given up trapping, instead focusing on helping Eleanor run the business and raising their children. He still took the occasional guide job, but he never stayed away longer than a few days, always eager to get back home to his family. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and pale blue eyes. He followed Ryder everywhere, learning to care for the animals and help with repairs around the property. Rose was quick and clever, always getting into things, and she had inherited her mother's tendency to hum while she played. One evening, when Thomas was 4 and Rose was 2, Eleanor stood in the kitchen preparing supper. Thomas was setting the table, his little face serious as he carefully placed each fork and knife. Rose sat on the floor playing with wooden blocks Ryder had made for her, and Eleanor hummed as she stirred the pot on the stove, the melody rising and falling. Ryder came in from outside, his arms full of firewood. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, his wife humming, his son helping, his daughter playing. His family, his home. "You are staring," Eleanor said without turning around, though there was amusement in her voice. "Just appreciating what I have," Ryder said. He set down the firewood and came to stand behind Eleanor, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "You are going to make me burn the stew," Eleanor said, but she leaned back into his embrace. "Do you remember when we first met?" Ryder asked. "When you were scrubbing that porch and humming?" "Of course," Eleanor said. "I knew right then," Ryder said. "I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not realize how completely." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I was so lost back then. I had this building, but I did not have a home, not really." "And now?" Ryder asked. "Now I have everything," Eleanor said simply. "A home, a family, a life I love, and it is all because you heard me humming and decided it was a sound worth keeping around." Ryder kissed her softly. "Best decision I ever made." "Papa," Rose called out, holding up a tower of blocks. "Look." Ryder pulled away from Eleanor and went to admire Rose's creation, praising her engineering skills in a serious tone that made the little girl giggle. Thomas finished setting the table and came to help Eleanor dish up the food. As they all sat down to eat, the small family together in the warm kitchen, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the girl she had been, arriving in San Angelo with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a dream. She thought about the moment she had almost let others silence her, almost made herself smaller to fit their expectations. And she thought about Ryder, the mountain man who had seen something in her that others missed, who had defended her right to be herself, who had told her that her humming made a house into a home. They ate dinner together, talking and laughing, making plans for the next day. After the meal, Ryder took the children upstairs for baths while Eleanor cleaned the kitchen. She worked quickly, humming all the while, the melody floating through the house. Later, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Ryder sat together on the front porch. It was early summer, and the air was warm but not yet oppressively hot. Stars glittered overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "You ever miss it?" Eleanor asked. "The mountains, the wilderness, that life." Ryder was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There is a freedom out there, a simplicity, but I would not trade this for anything. The mountains were my life, but you and the children, you are my heart. There is a difference." Eleanor took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you, Ryder Flynn." "I love you too, Eleanor Flynn." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night settle over San Angelo. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the boarding house stood solid and welcoming, a beacon for travelers and a testament to what two people could build together. And if Eleanor began to hum softly, a melody carried on the warm night air, well, that was just perfect. That was home. The years passed peacefully. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, eventually learning to hunt and track in the hills Ryder had once called home. Rose became a skilled cook and baker, working alongside her mother in the boarding house kitchen and humming all the while, carrying on the tradition. When Thomas turned 16, he asked his father to teach him everything about living in the wilderness. Ryder agreed, and they spent a summer in the mountains together, father and son, learning and bonding in the place that had once been Ryder's refuge. When they returned, Thomas had the same confident ease in the wilderness that Ryder carried, but he also had his mother's social grace and warmth. Rose, at 14, had suitors already lining up, drawn by her beauty and the warmth she radiated. But Eleanor and Ryder were protective, making sure she understood her worth and would not settle for anything less than true love and respect. Eleanor and Ryder's third child, another son they named James, arrived when Thomas was 7 and Rose was 5. He was a surprise, but a welcome one, and he grew up adored by his older siblings and doted on by his parents. The boarding house became something of a landmark in San Angelo. People came from miles around to stay at the Flynn place, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations. Eleanor's cooking was legendary, and Ryder's quiet strength and fair dealings made him respected throughout the territory. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Eleanor by taking her back to the mountains for a week, just the two of them. They left the children with Mary, who had married a local rancher but still helped at the boarding house when needed, and rode out into the wilderness. Ryder took Eleanor to his old cabin, a solid structure nestled in a valley with a clear stream running nearby. It was simple but beautifully situated, surrounded by pine trees and with a view of the distant mountains that took Eleanor's breath away. "This is where I lived," Ryder said as they stood outside the cabin. Before everything changed." Eleanor looked around at the peaceful setting, trying to imagine Ryder here alone, surviving but not truly living. "It is beautiful," she said, "but lonely." "It was," Ryder agreed. He pulled her close. "I thought I was content here. I thought solitude was what I needed, but I was just hiding, Eleanor, hiding from life and from the possibility of being hurt. You taught me that the risk is worth it, that love is worth any pain that might come with it. Have I caused you pain?" Eleanor asked, tilting her head back to look at him. "Only the pain of loving you so much it scares me sometimes," Ryder said. "The fear of something happening to you or the children, of losing this happiness. But even that fear is worth it for what we have." They spent the week exploring the mountains, Ryder showing Eleanor the places he had loved during his years of solitude. They fished in cold streams, watched elk grazing at dawn, and slept under the stars wrapped in each other's arms. It was a magical time, a chance to reconnect away from the demands of the boarding house and children. On their last night, as they sat by a campfire watching sparks drift up toward the star-filled sky, Eleanor began to hum. The melody echoed off the mountains, carrying on the night breeze, and Ryder closed his eyes to listen. "That never gets old," he said. "What does not?" "Your humming," Ryder said. "It is like a piece of home I can carry anywhere. Even here, in the place I lived for years, it does not feel complete without that sound." Eleanor shifted closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we will have more adventures?" she asked. "Or is this it? The boarding house and the children and this quiet life?" "This quiet life is the greatest adventure I could imagine," Ryder said. "But if you want something more, something different, we will find it. Together." "No," Eleanor said softly. "This is perfect. I was just making sure you felt the same way." They returned to San Angelo refreshed, and more in love than ever, if that was possible. The children launched themselves at their parents the moment they arrived, and the boarding house felt complete again with everyone together. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and Ryder watched their children grow and begin their own lives. Thomas, at 20, married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on land Ryder helped them purchase, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own independence. Rose, at 18, fell in love with a young lawyer who had come to San Angelo to start a practice. Eleanor watched her daughter's courtship with a mixture of pride and nostalgia, remembering her own love story. When Rose married, Eleanor cried happy tears and Ryder had to be forcibly restrained from threatening the groom, though everyone knew he liked the young man just fine. James, who inherited his mother's business sense and his father's strength, took over much of the daily operations of the boarding house as he grew older. He had a knack for dealing with difficult guests and keeping everything running smoothly, and Eleanor was grateful for his help. On a warm spring evening in 1895, Eleanor stood in the kitchen of the boarding house, the same kitchen where she had stood so many years ago as a frightened young woman unsure of her future. She was 51 now, with threads of silver in her hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling. But she was happy, deeply and truly happy, in a way she had never imagined possible. She was making bread, her hands working the dough with the practiced ease of decades. And she was humming, the same melody her mother had taught her, the same song she had sung while scrubbing the porch the day Ryder first arrived. Ryder came into the kitchen, moving a bit slower than he used to but still strong and solid. His hair was more gray than dark now, and his beard was fully silver, but his pale blue eyes were as sharp and kind as ever. "There is that sound," he said, coming to stand beside her. Eleanor smiled. "Were you listening?" "Always," Ryder said. He took her floury hand and brought it to his lips. "Do you know what today is?" "Tuesday," Eleanor guessed. "It is 19 years to the day since I first walked up to this boarding house and heard a woman humming on the front porch," Ryder said. 19 years since my life truly began." Eleanor set down her bread dough and turned to face her husband fully. 19 years. It feels like both forever and no time at all. "I know what you mean," Ryder said. He pulled her close, not caring about the flour that transferred to his shirt. "Thank you, Eleanor, for being exactly who you are, for humming while you work and making this house a home, for loving me and giving me a family, for everything." "Thank you for hearing me," Eleanor said, tears in her eyes, "for seeing me when I felt invisible, for telling me that my humming was something good instead of something to hide, for loving all of me, including the parts others found annoying." They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other, two people who had found in each other what they had both been searching for without knowing it. Outside, San Angelo bustled with activity. Upstairs, James was helping a new guest settle in. Somewhere in town, their married children were going about their lives, starting families of their own. But in this moment, in this kitchen, there was just Eleanor and Ryder, the mountain man and the woman who hummed, two souls who had found their home in each other. Eleanor pulled back slightly and looked up at her husband. "I have loved every minute of these 19 years, she said. "Even the hard parts, even the scary parts. All of it has been worth it because I got to spend it with you." "We have a lot more years ahead of us," Ryder said. "And I plan to spend every single one of them making sure you know how much I love you." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "I already know, but I will never get tired of hearing it." That evening, as they had done thousands of times before, they prepared supper together for the boarding house guests. Eleanor hummed while she cooked. Ryder set the table and carried dishes, and the house was filled with warmth and the smell of good food and the sound of Eleanor's melody. When they sat down to eat with their guests, a traveling family and two businessmen from Dallas, the conversation flowed easily. The father of the traveling family commented on how welcoming the atmosphere was, how it felt less like a commercial establishment and more like visiting relatives. "That is all my wife," Ryder said, looking at Eleanor with obvious pride. "She has a gift for making people feel at home." "It is the humming," the mother said, smiling at Eleanor. "I heard you in the kitchen. My grandmother used to hum while she worked, and it always made me feel safe and cared for. Your house has that same feeling." Eleanor felt her eyes prick with tears. After all these years, to be told that the thing she had once been criticized for, The thing she had almost suppressed was what made her home special. It meant everything. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is perhaps the loveliest compliment I have ever received." After dinner, after the guests had retired to their rooms or settled in the parlor to read, Eleanor and Ryder sat together on their bed. Ryder was mending a bridle, and Eleanor was working on a quilt, their hands busy with familiar tasks. "Do you ever think about where we would be if things had gone differently?" Eleanor asked. "If those boarders had not complained about my humming, if you had not been there to defend it," Ryder considered the question. "I think we would have found each other anyway," he said. "Maybe not as quickly, maybe not in exactly the same way, but I believe some things are meant to be." "Do you really think that?" Eleanor asked. "That we were fated?" "I think we were two lonely people who needed each other," Ryder said. "And I think we were smart enough and brave enough to recognize that when we found it. The rest is just details." Eleanor set down her quilting and moved to sit beside Ryder. He put aside his work and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I am glad we found each other," Eleanor said. "So am I," Ryder said. "Every single day I am glad." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. Somewhere downstairs, a floorboard creaked. In the distance, a dog barked. But inside their room, there was peace and contentment and a love that had only deepened with time. The years continued to unfold, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that are part of every life. Thomas and Sarah had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, who loved visiting their grandparents at the boarding house. Rose and her lawyer husband had 3 children, all as clever and ambitious as their parents. James eventually married a teacher from back east, and they had twins, a boy and a girl, who became the light of Eleanor and Ryder's later years. Eleanor and Ryder grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Ryder's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making his detailed leatherwork difficult, but he found new joy in teaching his grandchildren to ride and track. Eleanor's vision dimmed slightly, forcing her to give up the fine needlework she had once enjoyed, but her cooking remained as excellent as ever. The boarding house remained in the family, with James and his wife taking over more and more of the operations as Eleanor and Ryder aged. But Eleanor still cooked occasionally, still oversaw the accounts, and still, always, hummed while she worked. On a crisp autumn morning in 1908, Eleanor woke to find Ryder already awake, propped up on pillows and watching her with a soft expression. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, beautiful," Ryder said. Eleanor laughed. They were both in their 60s now, their faces lined and their bodies tired, but Ryder still called her beautiful and she still believed he meant it. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Ryder said. "I am thinking about the life we have built and the family we have raised. I am thinking about the day I rode up to this boarding house and heard you humming, and how that moment changed everything." Eleanor reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one," Ryder said immediately. "Do you?" "None," Eleanor said. "Well, maybe one. I wish we had more time. This life has been so good and I am not ready for it to end." "Who says it is ending?" Ryder asked. "We have years yet," and they did. They had more years of watching grandchildren grow, of celebrating holidays together, of sitting on the front porch in the evenings and watching the sun set over San Angelo. They had more years of working side by side, of quiet conversations and gentle touches, of a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. They had more years of Eleanor humming while she worked, filling the boarding house with a sound that meant home and family and everything good in the world. They had more years of Ryder listening to that humming and feeling grateful every single time that he had been wise enough to defend it all those years ago. On a summer evening in 1912, the entire family gathered at the boarding house for a celebration. It was Eleanor and Ryder's 34th wedding anniversary, and their children and grandchildren had all come to mark the occasion. The house was full of laughter and conversation, children running through the halls and adults catching up on each other's news. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, directing the preparation of the feast with the help of her daughters and daughters-in-law. She moved among them, tasting and adjusting and offering advice, and all the while she hummed. Rose hummed along with her mother, and Eleanor noticed that Rose's oldest daughter, little Eleanor named for her grandmother, was humming too, though she was only 6 and probably did not realize she was doing it. The sight made Eleanor's heart swell. The tradition would continue. The humming would go on, passed down through generations, a small thing that connected them all. Ryder found her in the kitchen an hour later, standing alone for a moment while the others carried food to the table. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, just as he had done thousands of times over the years. "Happy anniversary," he murmured into her hair. "Happy anniversary," Eleanor said, leaning back into his embrace. 34 years, Ryder said. "That is a long time." "Not long enough," Eleanor said. "No," Ryder agreed. "Not nearly long enough." They stood together in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, the family they had built and the home they had created. From the dining room came the sound of conversation and laughter, the voices of their children and grandchildren blending together in a symphony of love and connection. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "For what?" "For everything," Eleanor said. "For being brave enough to love me. For defending my right to be myself. For building this life with me. For every single day of these 34 years." "I should be thanking you," Ryder said. "You gave me a reason to come down from the mountains. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." They turned to face each other, these two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful out of nothing, who had loved each other through everything life had thrown at them. "I love you," Eleanor said. "I love you too," Ryder said. "More than words can say." They kissed, a soft, gentle press of lips, made even more meaningful by the decades of kisses that had come before it and the promise of all the kisses yet to come. Then, hand in hand, they walked into the dining room to join their family. They took their places at the head of the long table, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by love and laughter and the warmth of family. James stood and raised his glass, offering a toast to his parents, to their love and their example and the life they had built. Everyone drank, and then the meal began, a noisy, joyful affair with conversations overlapping and children squirming and food being passed from hand to hand. And through it all, if you listened carefully, you could hear it. A soft humming, barely audible under the chatter but always there, a melody that spoke of love and home and everything good in the world. Eleanor hummed while she ate, unconsciously as always, and the sound wove through the evening like a golden thread, connecting them all. It was the sound of contentment, of a life well lived, of dreams realized and love found. It was the sound that had started everything, that had drawn Ryder to Eleanor all those years ago, that had made a building into a home. It was the sound that would continue long after Eleanor and Ryder were gone, passed down through Rose and young Eleanor, and who knew how many generations to come. A legacy of simple joy and the courage to be authentically yourself. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Eleanor and Ryder stood on the front porch, waving goodbye to their family. The stars came out one by one overhead, and the warm summer breeze carried the scent of Eleanor's roses from the garden. "This has been a good life," Eleanor said. "The best," Ryder agreed. They went inside together, turning off lamps and checking that everything was secure for the night. Then they climbed the stairs to their room, moving slowly but still hand in hand, still together as they had been for 34 years. As Eleanor brushed out her hair and Ryder prepared for bed, she began to hum again, softly, the melody her mother had taught her so many years ago. Ryder paused to listen, a smile crossing his weathered face. "That humming," he said, as he had said so many times over the years, "that humming makes this house a home." Eleanor smiled at him in the mirror, her eyes warm with love. "And you," she said, "make my life complete." They climbed into bed together, two people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor hummed one last soft note, a perfect ending to a perfect day, a perfect note in the ongoing symphony of their life together. And in the morning, she would wake and begin humming again, as she always had, as she always would. Because that was who she was, and Ryder loved her for it, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting and true. The humming would go on, a small, constant sound that meant love and home and family. It would echo through the boarding house for years to come, a reminder of the woman who had the courage to be herself and the man who had recognized that courage for the gift it was. It was a simple thing, really. Just a woman humming while she worked, but it had changed everything. It had built a home, created a family, and proven that the things we try to hide about ourselves are often the very things that make us most lovable. Eleanor and Ryder's story was one of love and acceptance, of finding your place in the world and having the courage to claim it. It was a story that would be told and retold in their family for generations, a reminder that true love means loving someone exactly as they are, humming and all. And so the years passed, full and rich and beautiful, and the humming continued, a constant melody that spoke of everything good and true and lasting. It spoke of home. It spoke of love. It spoke of a life well lived and a love well earned. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.